Welcome to Praxis. I'm Bronwyn Adcock. I'd like to welcome our audience, those of you here with us in Sydney and those in Honiara, Dili and Port Moresby, and also those watching on APAC, online and listening on radio. Today we're discussing women in agriculture. Across the globe, women account for almost half the agricultural workforce and make a significant contribution to quality and output. But this contribution is consistently undervalued, and women have less access to productive resources and opportunities and are often paid significantly less, if at all. In the Pacific, even though women play an essential role in the sector, they are often excluded from local authority decision-making in the management of markets and have limited control over the land they work on or other assets. This inequality is holding back development for everyone. The Food and Agriculture Organisation estimates that equalising access to productive resources could increase output by 2.5 to 4%. A new report from the International Finance Corporation analysing the role of women in agriculture in Papua New Guinea says that focusing on women's contribution is key to improving agribusiness. So how can we level the field for women in agriculture? And how can we ensure that the challenges and opportunities presented by the growth of modern supply chains are met and fully realised? Joining us to discuss this, we have Amy Luinstra, a Senior Gender Specialist at the International Finance Corporation, Christie Chang, an agricultural economist with the University of New England, and Randy Stringer, Professor of Agriculture and Food Policy at the University of Adelaide. If we can start by looking at our region, in PNG, agriculture accounts for around 1/3 of the country's GDP. In the Solomon Islands, it's around 70%, and in Timor-Leste, it provides a livelihood for 90% of the population. So it's clearly a vital sector. How involved are women in agriculture in your experience? Amy?
Well, certainly women are absolutely central to the production of every commodity that we've looked at. So the study that we just released was looking specifically at coffee, cocoa, and fresh produce, and we found women doing substantial parts of production in all three value chains, and almost, exclusively doing the third is fresh produce. But certainly women are doing perhaps even the majority of work in coffee and cocoa. And one of the important findings of the study is that women are doing the particular jobs that have the most bearing on the final quality of the product, which of course is very relevant to the final price and therefore relevant to the income the household gets from it.
Christie, what's your experience? How involved are women in agriculture in the areas that you've worked in?
Okay, my project focuses mainly on sweet potato value chain in Papua New Guinea, and women are definitely the key players in the sweet potato value chain, not just production but also marketing. And recently they have been becoming involved in sweet potato processing. So it is very important for women to be able to access market and other services so they can improve their productivity.
Randy, what have you seen in the areas you worked in? You've worked in Vanuatu, I understand?
Vanuatu and Fiji and Samoa, and same story. I mean, across everything from the production side, cleaning, sorting, packaging, transporting, selling. They dominate in the markets, all the vendor markets and wet markets and roadside stalls across most of the Pacific. And they prepare food. I mean, so every little aspect of the value chain, the women are crucial.
Mm. Randy, can you explain for me what this concept of the value chain in agriculture is? What is it, and where do women fit into the value chain?
So when we talk about the value chain, we're talking about that whole link of the links across the chain. So you have inputs going in, someone produces it, and someone maybe processes it, changes it, cleans it in some way. It goes to a market, and then it's sold. It may go to a company, a cocoa company may buy it, and it ends up in chocolate and the consumer. So that entire chain from the producer to the consumer is what we talk about with the chain. So we're interested in the role women can play in every aspect of that. What role are they playing? What are the barriers to playing a much greater role, which most of us find in the work that we do? And so it's across that whole range of areas in the chain. The product moves, but also how does information flow back down that chain? How do relationships get built up across that chain? So we're not just looking at the product, but information, access to those markets, access to knowledge, capacity building, and then how those relationships are formed across the chain.
So looking at it as a chain, where are women missing from in those? What are the links that they're missing from, and why are these important?
I'd say pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
I think from Amy's study that you see that what's happening is that at each of those aspects, so let's take the production aspect, we in the development community just, no matter, we're not doing enough to get the information, the capacity building. We have lots of lead farmer programs, we have farmer training programs, we have knowledge extension, but just way too often they exclude women. So across anything from market access to the information, we're not involving women enough. Some of the reasons are simple, that the women are very much busy and the extension officers come in with their program and they don't involve the women in the timing of the training. When should we have the training? How often should we have the training? When's appropriate for you? So just those simple things exclude lots of women from the training. And then you go up to the processing. Again, there's all kinds of opportunities that are provided for men, and training for men, and access to credit for men, and financing that we don't have the same access for women. So all the way through the market we're working with we have two big programs with UN Women. The first one was called Partners Improving Markets, and then the second one was Markets for Change, which is going on right now, funded by the Australian government. 90% of the vendors in markets are women, and yet they're excluded from the governance of the market. So they're trying to sell, and the issues that they need resolved: security issues, hygiene issues, dormitories, because they'll come in from these islands, they'll stay 2 or 3 days till they sold all their produce. All of that's being ignored way too often.
Christie, I know that you've worked with women working in the sweet potato sector in Papua New Guinea. Which areas are they missing out in the chain?
The sweet potato, depending on what type of value chains you are looking at. In the short value chain, which is from the village directly to the local markets, women involved in everything from planting to harvesting to marketing those the products. So in that sense, they are totally involved. So the problem for women who are selling in the local markets are that the market facilities are very, very poor. Right? They could be in the sun, in the mud, and the showers came, they just nowhere to hide. So the market facilities, I think, is the big problem for women who are doing local marketing. And the other problem with local marketing is that they have money on them, and on the way back, it's likely to be harassed or robbed, or so security is an issue for women who are doing the local marketing.
What about women who miss out on the opportunity or do they miss out on the opportunity to actually gain fair income from their work?
Yes, in the local marketing they do, but more recently I'm talking about the Hagen market, right? It used to be built and it was redeveloped with Aussie money to make it a very modern facility, toilets, F-pause, A-post, nursery for babies, everything, water supply, nice toilets. And it's supposed to be built for farmer sellers, but now it's been dominated by black marketers. That's the term they use in PNG for people who are resellers rather than farmers themselves. So for farmers themselves wanting to sell in the market, they usually cannot get a bench space to sell in. So they back to the mud, back to the sun and all that. Yeah.
Amy, the International Finance Corporation is about to release a report called The Fruits of Her Labour. What constraints did this report identify that women are facing?
Right, so there's a number of things that are impeding women from participating fully, and really, more importantly, from benefiting fully from the work that they're definitely doing. And those include to some extent, social and cultural constraints, because if the training and the input suppliers and everything is happening in these public spaces where they have to travel to get there, and then it's all led by men, then it can be inappropriate for women, or they feel it's inappropriate for them to be very involved. And second, and related to that, is it's just not taking account of all the other responsibilities they have at home and for their families and with their communities and with their churches and other things. And so one of the things that's coming out of the report is the need to have training and have support services for farmers that are gender smart, that are just paying attention to when women are available, what kinds of ways they're going to learn best, and what's going to have the biggest impact for them. The report also points to a whole host of kind of meta issues and infrastructure challenges that have a disproportionately negative effect on women. For example, poor transportation corridors. The security issue that Christie mentioned is a major one. Poor overall levels of education and literacy, which make all of this a lot more challenging. Poor cool chain facilities along the routes to the bigger markets where selling would be more lucrative. So there's a whole series of constraints. And importantly, what we're trying to do with the work that we've done, which is jointly with the World Bank, is to identify who can take action and what's the most meaningful, impactful action we can take now.
And so what are some of the things that you've identified that could be done?
Well, some of the simple things would be just looking at the programs we're already running and making sure that the training is as gender smart as it can be, as paying attention to all of these factors that keep women out of training. Because actually we know from a number of studies that extension training and training services to farmers can be really effective, can have huge impact on productivity, and can have a good positive impact on household income. But making sure that the people doing the work are getting the training, which is such an obvious connection we should be making, is actually something that requires effort. So we're doing some things along those lines. We're hiring a gender specialist to go through and look at all the training and the curriculum and how we're doing it and rolling it out, and we're measuring the change there. We're putting in strong targets for reaching women in the training that's offered, and we're looking for opportunities to develop women as extension workers themselves, because one of the constraints is only men leading extension work, and being creative about the way training is delivered and extension services are delivered in terms of, maybe one example that we came across that we really like is the idea of lead couples instead of just a lead farmer. So lead couples who run a demonstration farm, who are meant to train those in the community, but have the man and the woman working together, demonstrating how they're sharing and respecting each other, as well as conveying all the ergonomic technical information that they need to. So those are some of the ideas we have going.
And are you confident that productivity would actually improve if some of these ideas were taken on board?
Well, we have a really interesting study from Indonesia. We worked with Ecom, which is a coffee trader, in Indonesia to test out our theory that involving women matters. And we studied a group of farmers who had no training, actually, then a group of farmers who had the normally delivered training that hit almost all men, and we studied a group of and then we offered training where all of these techniques about involving women and seeking to involve them, but also including some gender material in the training, took place, and we measured the impact. And in fact, even without training, there was some improvements in productivity. With training with mostly men, still a 95% improvement in productivity. But then the group where gender smart kind of techniques were incorporated and women were very well represented in the training numbers, or relative to what they had been, I should say, it had 131% impact on productivity of these farms. So we know that it makes a difference. And just making sure that it is done in a way that's appropriate and it's done consistently, and that the impact is measured so that the uptake continues, are some of the keys that we're trying to leverage in our work in Papua New Guinea.
Randy, what do you think? Do you think there is a connection between increasing involvement of women and improved productivity?
Amy's example is great, and I love that lead farmer because it's just such common sense. It makes so much sense, and why that hasn't been introduced before is just amazing. No, I think that it's not just that one case. I think if we took all the cases from different studies, you'd find the same thing, that you'd get huge productivity increases if we were to provide more extension, more training, organizational training, finance training, track and trace system training, certification training that involved women. So you'd get just a huge benefit from that. And some of the things that both Christie and Amy talk about are that the importance of having the cash come to the woman. The woman controls the cash across this instead of having to send the mail to send it, and then less money goes back. Because again, the studies across the globe show it's just when you have women in control of that money, there's going to be better eating, better diet and nutrition in that household, which leads to better learning outcomes, better productivity outcomes, just because people are healthier. They learn faster, fewer days missed at school. So there's all those kinds of benefits that are going to occur throughout the entire economy. I think a big effort for us is to get this information into lots of the businesses that trade with the Pacific so that they recognize the benefits that they can have. And you've got to make the business case that, yep, there's productivity, and we can show them that you'll get big productivity, not just from the production side, but from the value adding and the transformation side. But you're also, it's good business because it's good story agriculture. It helps you sell your products. It's good corporate social responsibility. And that's what we're not doing enough of. And the bank started some programs, but I know for most of us we're weak on that side and taking advantage and get these companies at the other end of the chain, at that downstream part that are purchasing these, to understand how much better off they will be by involving women and helping to facilitate those kinds of programs that Amy's talking about.
Mm. Christie, what kind of changes would you expect to see on the ground if women had more access to cash as a result of their labour?
Well, I think definitely they won't be doing as much hard work as involved in farming, because if you compare to processing or being a resellers or a wholesalers of fresh produce in the market, the workload is much lower than if you labor all day in the field, most of the time on your own. So I would think, if women have cash, not only they improve household food security and nutrition and send kids to school, but also give them an opportunity to move up to some other enterprises, diversify their income and maybe better returns for their labor.
Mm. Amy, when we talk about the idea of a cash crop, what is a cash crop and why is this an important consideration for promoting women in agriculture?
Well, just technically a cash crop is just what you're selling for money and not just eating or consuming and growing for subsistence purposes. So it's certainly a trend everywhere. And in Papua New Guinea and in the Pacific, increasingly people are selling things. It creates various challenges when cash crops come in, and one of them is the issue that we're talking about, the increased stress on women who are expected to contribute to the cash crop as well as run the subsistence, as well as run the rest of the household. But it certainly creates some advantages in terms of it does create a source of income and livelihood for families in developing countries where there's not a lot of sources of that, and the vast majority of the populations in the countries are still very much dependent on agriculture. So if they're able to sell something that's for higher returns than they used to, of course it creates a number of advantages. It's important for women as well as men that they're getting the maximum prices and things that they can from that. There's another important consideration here that's been mentioned a bit about nutrition, though, and the risk that when cash crops come in, that nutrition at the household level suffers a bit, and that maybe the family garden isn't paid as much attention to because there is a focus on cocoa or coffee or what's getting the higher return. We see that to some extent in the Pacific, and there's certainly some areas or some regions in which there's a concern there. And so again, information provision, as has been talked about, and training is really important, and that's holistic and not purely about the business and maximizing the profit.
Can I just add to that? Cash crop in PNG often refer to export commodities such as coffee, cocoa, palm oil or oil palm, and copra. Okay? And so those are cash crops, mainly for export markets. And the food crop traditionally will be sweet potato, yams, taro, bananas. So those are food crops. But more and more, those food crops are also sold in the market, just because urbanization, people are not able to produce their own food. So it's all these traditional food crops are available on the market. And that's one area that we want to encourage farmers, women farmers, to be able to sell good quality food crops on the market.
Fresh produce has typically been an area that can be more lucrative for women. Is this something that can be harnessed and promoted?
The extension work in PNG is mainly done by the Fresh Food Development Agency, and they have done a tremendous job of training farmers, both men and women, how to grow introduced vegetables. And this introduced vegetable will be something that we can see in our supermarket, broccoli, as well as carrots and cabbages. So they are training farmers how to grow those vegetables. And the soil in PNG Highland, they're just fantastic. It's black, it's loose, it's just fertile, after all these years. So it's very good environment to grow fresh produce.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I think it is, again, another area where we're probably not doing nearly as well as we should be, because in Fiji, with cash crops, you've got the women, or with a lot of these food crops, fresh produce, the women control those. But again, because they're having to take care of the household and the group and watch after kids and do the cooking, they're not able to take it to market, to take it to that next step. And in the initial tips to try to say, well, we can organize, and Amy can go one day and Bronwyn can go the next, and take it. Those efforts have been stalled because we're not being gender smart about the way we organize that. That we're going in and saying, we're choosing the times when we try to organize meetings instead of looking at these communities and seeing when it's appropriate, when they can meet, when they have time. So I think there's so much more that can be done so that you could increase the value that the women receive and control from fresh produce.
I couldn't resist jumping in on the amazing soil in PNG Highlands point, because it's true. And what is almost criminal is you see the mining companies that are operating in the same communities in which a lot of this stuff is grown, or not so far away from them, importing fruit and vegetables from Australia and New Zealand and elsewhere. And you think, this is criminal. You can certainly do better and look for local sources. And it's not as easy as it sounds. There's food safety issues, there's quality issues, there's market linkages issues. But that's a big focus for IFC in the coming years, is to see, and other development partners I think too, is to help people overcome those barriers to make sure that basically as much value add for the mining companies and others can stay in the country through things like sourcing locally for fruits and vegetables that can easily, and in fact probably more nutritiously and better lookingly, be grown there.
Is access to credit an issue for women in agriculture?
I think, indeed, access to credit for anyone in agriculture anywhere on earth is a big issue. Like, banks hate lending to the agricultural sector as a rule. And so the extra stretch in a developing country and to women is definitely a bridge too far for most banks. We are trying to work through IFC with some of the banks that are active in the region to get better access to financial services across the board. So sometimes it's credit for buying things, but a lot of time it's just a bank account. And massive proportion, I think it's 80% of Pacific, of Papua New Guinea, and in the rest of the Pacific it's even higher, don't have bank accounts. And so getting people bank accounts and using mobile technology to do that, and their mobile phones, we've seen some success of that, but it's a big push for us. Financial services do have the potential to improve the control women have over resources and improve the way, what money is there is managed.
Mm. Randy, I know you've already touched on it briefly, but how important do you think it is to involve companies in this process and to get them on board with involving the women to a greater degree?
No, I think it's just a huge area that we can make lots of progress in, and working with the hotels. I mean, we're finding issues related to that, and that it's not a problem for the producers to send to the hotels, but the hotels now, even if they want to provide local, because lots of tourists are saying, well, wait, all these other people are eating taro, and what is this stuff you're giving us? These potatoes we've imported from Australia. But it's the way they organize. They pay their bills 3 months after they've received the produce. And so, it's a matter of just sitting them down together and saying, okay, well, we can work this out. We've got a cash flow issue. How do we take care of that? And again, you have women in with that discussion, because we're being successful with that with tomatoes and a couple of other fresh produce items in Fiji. So there's the local companies, and then there's I think, at least in the Pacific, in our experience, that aiming less at the bulk commodity market and aiming more at the niche market. Like we've had great success with cocoa, because it's a scarce item to begin with. It's a great story for these companies. And in chocolate, for example, it's the really high end of the market it's trying to source cocoa from the South Pacific. So I think, and with the coffee, it's the same way. So there's a lot of these export crops. Oil palm may be slightly different, but the Europeans, the Finns, and others that are wanting really sustainable, proper palm oil. So I think there's opportunities across all of these, but there's no information. I mean, some of the cocoa companies we work with, they've been tasting, checking cocoa, making chocolate. These guys for 20 years, they've never been on a cocoa farm. So coming to Vanuatu, making chocolate from the beans and traveling around to the communities where the beans come from, that was a game changer in our project there. It's a game changer in terms of these communities understanding it's that information flow that we were talking about. So it makes a huge difference and tremendous opportunities. And I think Amy may be able to talk a little bit about what they're doing with the cruise ships also, another opportunity.
Right, indeed. I mean, work that IFC has done in Vanuatu in the tourism industry has included just evaluating exactly what the tourism industry and cruise ships in particular are adding to that economy, and what potential growth and there is in looking at what the tourists are buying or what they could be buying, what they want to buy, and how to get it to them, and what messages they're receiving on the ship or whatever about what they should buy, what's safe, what can be imported back into Australia, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of disconnect there in the market that actually we're trying to tease apart and provide the information that helps it add up better to benefit for people in Vanuatu.
Approximately 80% of the land area in the Pacific region is under customary authority. Is this an issue for women's access to land and their control over their resources or not?
Well, based on my experience, no. We had done the farm survey of farmers in Jiwaka province up in the highlands, and we asked about their land holdings and the ownership of the land. It has not a problem. Has not been a problem. You read in the literature, 97% even, it's owned by customers, not by the clans, by the customary groups. But in my experience, the land is passed down from their forefathers, generation after generation, so they know who owns what. And it's to the farmers, the title and the rights are very clear. And for fresh produce, it's not a problem because it's not trees. Like Amy has mentioned before, tree crops, which kind of stem your rights on the land. If it doesn't happen, fresh produce, annual crop, it's not a problem.
I agree with Christie on that. I mean, I think that it's much more beneficial in so many ways, that customary law. I mean, it's a very Western thing that you have to have, somehow we think that if you don't have fee simple title, it's not yours, you can't get credit, you won't take care of it. When there's this, you can find examples where people that own their own land will destroy it every bit as much as people that have common property. And so especially in these customary, the resilience and risk that provides those communities is hugely important. So coming in and trying to say that we need to take that apart so that there can be development, I think we may be making a big mistake.
Okay, I think we'll move now to some questions. We'll start with a question from the Solomon Islands. It's for Amy and anyone else who'd like to answer. The Solomon Islands has just elected a new government, which is forming in a few weeks. If you could give an important message from the fruits of her Labour report for the new government, what would it be?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Great. So, listen, we found that women are, of course, they're active in the agricultural industries there, and what is critical is making sure that they can benefit from it, and making sure that the whole country can benefit from it by ensuring that they're trained and producing to their maximum potential. And that requires special effort. It'll definitely pay off. We know from lots of evidence from the Pacific, but also from outside the Pacific, that it pays off to do training and target it to women who are doing the work that matters the most. But you have to do it. You have to be conscious of it, and you have to do it. So improving the copra and the oil palm and the other things that the soils are really good at producing will require special attention to women.
Okay, all right. We'll take a question now from our audience here in Sydney.
It's Stephen Close, Human Development Specialist in the World Bank in Sydney. Thank you for a fantastic discussion. I'd just like to add to Amy's comment for the incoming government in Solomon Islands. I really appreciated the importance of education and training as a barrier for women's productivity in agriculture. It's essential to note your earlier comment also about the role of literacy for women to be productive in agriculture. And unfortunately, Solomon Islands is one of the 8 lowest spenders on adult literacy of 80 countries worldwide, even though only 20% of the population have functional literacy. So I would say it's really important for the incoming Solomon Islands government to consider even very small investments in providing second chance education pathways for women, because evidence shows that the role of functional literacy for women is much more important in their productivity and livelihoods than just having attended primary school, where often kids are not gaining the basic skills that they need. Also, women's involvement in agriculture is very important to the jobs crisis in Pacific Island countries. When 4 out of 5 Solomon Islanders don't have formal employment, they're not formally employed in the public sector or the private sector. Getting women more productive in agriculture and livelihoods is the most meaningful employment for the majority of the population. Thanks.
Thank you. Randy, I'll get you to speak to that. How important do you think literacy is for the women that you've worked with? Is it necessary?
Look, just in my experience in development, there is nothing more important than education. And education for women is at the top of education. And it's just, education brings better incomes, better health outcomes, better nutrition outcomes, better productivity outcomes, everything. There's nothing we could do that's more important. And I think often, even if we take one step and we say we're not being gender smart, we take one step and we say, okay, well, we're going to provide a school and it's available, it's close by, but we don't think about, well, what's going on in these villages or these households that young girls are doing that they can't attend. So we're not doing enough to say, okay, well, it could be something as simple as a well because they're collecting water. So we need to make sure we get the well so that they can have access to time for school. So it's, again, involving these communities and finding out how time and what works. But it's everything, everybody gains, all of society gains. I mean, people are more mobile, the cost of doing business goes down, people learn faster, education.
Okay, we have another question which relates to that. It's asking specifically about financial literacy. How important is financial literacy, and what have you seen in the Pacific? Christie, I think that you've talked on this.
Well, access to finance or credit definitely was one of the 3 priority issues we identified at the stakeholder workshop for my sweet potato project. So access to credit, transport issues, and also market information. Those are 3 priority issues. So the first thing we did was try to link the women farmers to microcredit service providers. So they are National Development Bank, worldwide, nationwide microfinance, and there's another one, PNG microfinance. So in the beginning, right, so we say, okay, because of the risk of lending to small farmers, the requirement is that you have to form a community group, community organization. Okay, so you have to be a group loan, not individual loan. So we get a group together, and in the beginning we have 3 women's group. So they all have these meetings with the microfinance service provider. And so they get a 1,000 kina loan per person quickly. But then a few weeks later, I went back and I say, what well, what did you use for that 1,000 kina? He said, oh, I buy, water can, I buy seeds, I buy fertilizer and all this. And I said, how much did you spend? He said, about 500 kina. So they borrow more than they need to. But also, the loan is for 12 months. But they pay them back in 3 to 4 months, thinking that they can borrow, next lot will be 3,000. So the first lot will be up to 1,000, second lot up to 3,000, and then you can borrow up to 10,000. So people was thinking about, okay, let me just pay back quickly so I can go 3,000 and 10,000. So this an example of lack of financial literacy. They don't understand the finance, the interest rate, the money should be saved, not thinking about making another loan as soon as possible. So what we did is knowing that the bank, microfinance bank, microcredit bank, they didn't provide this service, so we developed this training modules to go back to the women farmers groups so they can understand better how to manage their finance, especially savings account. Like Amy mentioned, it's not easy. But now, the PNG microfinance, they even come to the village to allow the woman to open the account, and they come every week, so you can make deposit and withdrawal. So things are looking good.
I just wanted to add on this because, certainly there's perhaps an extra hurdle for getting women financially literate. But farmers in general, and this is also an issue in basically every developing region and probably much of the developed world as well, seeing their farm, for smallholder farmers, seeing their farm as a business that should be treated as a business is a big leap. And that requires some specific education about how do you think about allocating your labor to the farm. And if you think of it as a business, then you can think about it as allocating labor and how it then balances with the rest of the things you have to do in a day, which is an important thing. But also, things, making decisions about fertilizers, about where to sell, when to sell, and just this whole idea of thinking of your farm as a business is requiring of quite a bit of training, and it's an important mental shift if you're really going to maximize, the productivity and the income you get from it, and that's for men and for women.
And that's a huge shift for the development community too, because they tend to be commodity specific. We're going to work on sweet potatoes, or we're going to work on cocoa, or we're going to work on chilies. And they treat these households as if that's all they are. Exactly. They're chili producers when they're not. They're households that probably half their income comes from off the farm. They happen to produce some chilies, but they've got lots of other things going on too. And we're really way behind in terms of treating and providing extension and services for households as a business. And it varies. These are very heterogeneous households. When you're younger and you've got kids and they're going to school, you're going to be making decisions that are very different than when you're my age and you've got kids that are all through that. So all that we need to target. We need to be much smarter. Sorry.
Okay, we'll take a question now from the floor in Sydney.
Thank you. Susan Ainge, President of New South Wales Women in Ag. I found your comments about the way the credit was used by the farmers very interesting. What I want to know is whether it actually resulted in more productivity, whether they were investing in things that would make them more productive, or whether they were just thinking of comfort. One of the biggest things for us as farmers, and Amy touched upon it, is availability of credit. I'm a farmer in drought in the northwest of New South Wales, so it's very easy to talk about it. We're viewed as small businesses. Banks have a very large risk margin that they put on farmers. This, I think, is out of proportion to the contribution we actually bring to the economy. And I've always said we have to split ourselves away from small businesses and be seen as an essential asset to the community. I feel very strongly that agriculture should be viewed in this way, but I actually worked with migrant farmers in the Sydney Basin, migrant women farmers, on a project that was funded by a grant from the federal government. And I found that once you actually showed the women the pathways to actually increase their productivity and, reduce their inputs, they would find the means to do it. So that's why my interest in what they did with those loans.
So, Christie, did you see a connection between the women accessing this credit and actually putting it towards things that resulted in greater productivity?
If they are into cash crop for fresh vegetables, you need to have good seeds. You need some fertilizers. You need water. More input, because in a food crop it's like minimal input. You wait for the rain and you grow it. But for cash crop, you have to put in more efforts. So we tell to farmers, you have to spend money to make money. So that's how they use those loans for, in the beginning, right, to buy inputs for their production. And then the output increases substantially just because they have better seeds, and top up with fertilizer and probably, chemicals for pest and disease control.
Okay, we have a question now which we haven't really touched on yet. It's for everyone. How are men being involved? Are they key to change, or are other factors more influential? Who would like to take that one to start?
Men?
How are men involved? Are men important to the process as well? Randy?
Well, at least in lots of places we're working, we find that they are. Again, it's a very heterogeneous world out there, so you find this variation across the households and men, certainly. But in a lot of the work, I'll take a quick example in Indonesia, where we've done lots of work over the past 5 years with men and women and trying to understand who makes decisions and how they make decisions as a household. And there we find that the men are when you go through different scenarios of what needs to be done, they're across those households, they really reach out and are anxious to get these new information or change types of systems where they're starting to understand, because they can make so much more money if they sell into the modern market, but they need track and trace systems. They need to be doing things differently. And so the deciding who takes on those roles, maybe more resistance as you move up into the kind, maybe the banks and the extension, that there's not a resistance, it's just not an awareness of what could happen. So or the opportunities are there. So maybe I don't see quite as much change in the government agencies, but in terms of the NGOs and the households, big opportunities and men willing to participate in changing.
Well, that's my experience as well. We did a study looking at the Mount Hagen market, and the women who sell in the market, they told us that men are looking after the kids for them, and also helping with the vegetable production, which used to be done by them. But now they are professional women selling at the market full time, and a lot of housework has passed on to men.
In Indonesia, we found men started preparing the lunches, cooking the food for the workers too. So same, yeah.
I think, of course, men are really important in this, and always important in efforts to improve gender equality. I think that, to make two specific points, I really do like this idea of lead couples when it comes to training extension workers, and using a lead farmer, but making sure it's a couple and working together, and that everyone's seeing the modeling of this kind of equitable sharing and respectful behavior. I think a second point needs to be made, because it's White Ribbon Day next week. I think about violence against women and men's violence against women, and that needs to change, and that's about fundamental exploring of masculinity, I think, and absolutely it affects the agricultural sector as it affects every sector of economy. So, indeed.
Well, that's quite a good lead-in, Amy. Then we've got a question from Timor's asking about domestic violence.
Okay.
Is there much being done to address domestic violence for women farmers in the Pacific, especially in Timor, and does it impact on loss of productivity, and how can it be improved?
Almost certainly it affects on loss of productivity. Almost certainly it does. I know of no studies that have looked at the agriculture sector and tried to monetize it or even quantify it. And in fact, there's very few studies across the Pacific that have any kind of cross-country comparable data on even prevalence of domestic violence, although there are a few. Those that exist, of course, have quite, really substantial and quite shocking numbers. reaching rural women with services around domestic violence is an incredibly challenging thing. I think there's some interesting work being done by the Family and Sexual Violence Action Committees in Papua New Guinea, and this is very integrated community services, but they haven't reached into rural areas at all to the extent that I know. And so I think it's a huge challenge, and it's about probably looking at what's already there in the communities and infusing opportunities to raise awareness and provide services on family and sexual violence there. And I don't have anything specific on East Timor, I'm sorry, but undoubtedly it's a huge issue and a challenge to address that's worth prioritizing.
Bronwyn, I do know there's these Timors over there. I do know that UN Women, it's a major part of their program in their Markets for Change and looking at violence against women. So they're putting a big effort into that now and working with they're not calling it lead couples, but they're working with men and women on this issue and communities and community leaders to try to get more awareness about that. So I think it's something certainly on in their portfolio, an important priority for them.
I definitely have concrete evidence that violence against women would affect productivity negatively if you have a broken arm. So that's quite regular scene, up in the PNG Highlands. Men can get upset for many reasons. Most of them, it's just to show they have the power to do it. But in our project, we try to provide gender training in the beginning of our workshop, just to raise awareness that when men and women they are working together, the family is better off, and it's better off for the society as well.
Okay, we have a question about migration from rural areas to urban areas. Is this impacting the agricultural sector and the role of women? So having more people come to urban areas?
I would see that as an opportunity for women farmers, because now they have a bigger market to supply their fresh produce to. So urbanization, I think, is an opportunity for women in agriculture in terms of expanding their the demand for their produce.
Okay, we've got a question again about the Fruits of Her Labour report, Amy, from Papua New Guinea. What sort of benefits can come from this report, do you think? And what examples, either from PNG or abroad, can we look at for good examples?
Okay. So the report was produced, was largely drafted earlier this year after extensive field work in Papua New Guinea looking at cocoa, coffee, and fresh produce in that country, and interviewing women in agriculture organizations up there, as well as cooperatives and a whole range of service providers, or of extension services providers, as well as the businesses involved. And then we held quite an interesting stakeholder workshop to just try to verify and tease out the real meaning of the report and the implications for our work there. And that took place in April, and we had over 60 people showing up before the meeting was even scheduled to start, and then staying for 9 solid hours talking it through with us. It was really quite remarkable. And we hope to replicate that again as we launch the report. But through that process, we did highlight, or we did find a few things that are working, and we also found a lot of, I think, opportunities to leverage the work we're already doing in a way that could be more beneficial for women. So I've talked about the lead couples as one interesting model. I think there's great work being done by Women in Agriculture Foundation there in Maria Linibi up in Leh and elsewhere in Papua New Guinea. There's Women in Coffee. There's a lot of good organizations out there. And one of the things that we as IFC are trying to do with a new project on fresh produce is to actively seek out the organizations where women have a strong voice, or maybe even women-only organizations, to develop their capacity and linkages into markets. So we're working with wholesalers in the Mount Hagen region to start with, and trying to plan out extension work for fresh produce providers there, including and specifically targeting actually women So that's kind of some of the stuff we're hoping to do. But we're also hoping to keep some of the momentum from our last year of work to get to meet regularly and see what's working and share experiences more broadly. And it's not all going to be done by IFC, we all know, nor the World Bank, nor any one actor. So the idea of coming together and sharing and learning together, I think we'd like to pursue.
Okay, we've got a question from Dilly. This one might be for you, I think, Randy. What are some interesting ways to increase private sector players in the field? And are there any examples you could give?
Well, I'll give the example of cocoa in Vanuatu. When we first became involved in this project in the University of Adelaide, it was a project that was just focused on productivity yields. And when we went in, we said, well, hang on, why are these communities and these households going to be adopting, spending a lot more time on cocoa production than something else because of the way they're selling it? And should we be finding out more information from these companies? So we just took samples, 5 kilo samples of beans. We sent some to Guittards in San Francisco, to Hague's here in Australia, in Adelaide, and sent some to Bain & Company & Co. down in Western Australia. We sent them the beans, just said, look, I called them up, would you guys analyze this? Would you let us know what you think? The company sent the analysis back. They all did all kinds of chemistry on them and taste test and roasting them, and they sent back a message which was all the same from all 3 companies. They're horrible. You could triple your yields, we won't buy these beans. And these guys pay 4, 5, 6 times the price that they're getting selling the Cadbury's in the Singapore market. But what surprised me the most, just that simple act, I'd like to take credit for it, but that simple act of us sending those beans, they came back and said, how can we help? Because they want access to these beans. So all of a sudden they became a partner in this value chain and this research. So one of the companies made chocolate bars from the beans and went back to Malakula with us. We visited the 5 communities. These guys tasted chocolate for the first time in their lives. Their grandfathers or great-grandfathers had probably, when the first French boat came by in the 1890s, I've just learned this afternoon, and introduced these cocoa trees. So that was a big game changer. And now these companies, they're helping a local chocolate company make chocolate so we can get quick feedback. They're identifying the research issues for the scientists. So I think it's a lot easier than many of us think, and especially the kinds of companies that are the high end, that are looking for the story, the corporate social responsibility, the coffee, the oil palm, the cocoa, Body Shop working with some products. So making contact, they're hopeful to get a hold of this. So in Timor too, that question came from Timor. So I think it's a matter of looking at those products, and in some cases it might just be local. It might be like the hotels, but making that connection, looking at both sides, sitting them down together, lots can happen from that. So we just shouldn't be shy about asking and trying to get them involved.
Okay, another question from Timor. Has anyone on the panel looked at the impacts of climate change on agriculture in the Pacific? Has it changed crops or workload?
There's lots of studies on climate change in the Pacific, and unfortunately things aren't looking good for the low-lying islands, and all of us know the story of Kiribati. But I think it's right now we're anticipating some major changes in agriculture, but the studies I'm seeing, the more recent or the near-term issues are going to be the frequency of violent storms, so the impact of the the high-speed winds, the cyclones, and those kinds of things. So no, it's not looking very good, the studies that are coming out for the Pacific and crops.
Will it make it more difficult for women, potentially?
I think it would, because the weather is much more unpredictable than before. Back in the good old days when the climate change wasn't such a big issue. When the tree flowers, that's the time to plant sweet potato. Now it's just it's anyone's guess.
One of our courses was sustaining agriculture through climate change. We spent a lot of time, and I know this is might be teaching you how to whatever you do to eggs, but the very important thing about climate change is the more you can get a plant, any plant, associated with the soil and deeper rooted in the soil, the more nutrition flows into that plant, and also the less it is impacted by climate change. And we've done a lot of things here in Australia, even up where we come from, to lessen the impact of climate change on even our broadacre farming. And that can be applied in your islands, particularly in relation to getting much deeper rooted plants. You know, encouraging the deep root. Don't water on the surface, water lower down, don't water as often on the surface. Those sort of things. Those are the sort of things you have to bring to your growers. And also record keeping. That's a very big and important thing that a lot of growers don't do. Market gardeners, yes, they look at whether the eucalyptus leaves in Australia are shiny, or that means it's going to rain. Well, it might be whether the plants are flowering, it's time to plant sweet potato. But record the temperatures and the rain around those events. Try and get a follow-on so that they can relate it back to their crop growth. It's a very important thing, and if you can incite that amongst your growers, they will start to understand how to plant their crops to respond to climate change.
If we're looking at examples of best practice that you've seen, can you give me a couple of examples of best practice, and are these things that can be replicated and expanded? Randy, did you want to?
Well, going back to Vanuatu, this project we were working on with UN Women, I think it's maybe not best practice, but successful. UN Women, again, was focused on the vendors, because 90% of them are women, and the issues they face with empowering them so that they can help have more control over the governance of these markets, and the security issues that they face that have been mentioned. But they ask us to help them not only with capacity training for their own staff, but also to look at issues of record keeping, finance, quality control, marketing. And at this time, this was a couple of years ago, in Efate, the main island, had just opened up a ring road. So the tour boats could come in, you could get off the boat, you could go a tour on the whole island. Well, there were 15 roadside stalls around that market, and they all looked exactly the same. They all sold pretty much the same thing. A couple of the roadside stalls looked a little prettier. They were tarted up a little nicer. But most of them were selling the same thing. So we had a colleague that worked with us quite a bit in our group, the Global Food Studies group. It was the founder of the Wollonga Farmers Market and the Adelaide Showground Farmers Market. So we asked her to go over and give a hand and spend 3 weeks working with these women to see what they needed and how it might work. So she spent 2 or 3 weeks there, and what they ended up with was the Rural Mamas Roadside Market program. With these 15 markets, they all have a specific yellow sign so people know that it's part of this system. They sell different things. One that's close to one of the little lagoons, they'll now rent also snorkeling equipment. You can get certain foods at this one, different opportunities to buy different handicrafts and different foods. So they really organized in a way. And she started working with the cruise ships. Cruise ships were... Some of the cruise ships explained to people, don't eat anything on the island. You know, I personally am a conspiracist. I think they were saying that because they didn't want them. They want to spend all their money on the ship eating food and not spending money on the island. But she began working with the cruise ships and convincing them that they could make money too. They could organize these trips. So she got all these links together, and now you've got this, an organized group, an organized tours, and women that understand how to present for a different type of client than they're used to. So it's I think, a very good example of how you can succeed.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. We still have a few more questions from our country officers, so that conversation will have to continue afterwards. But for now, that's the end of our discussion. Can we please thank our panellists, Amy Luinstra, Christie Chang and Randy Stringer. Thank you. I'd like to also thank everyone joining us here in Sydney or from afar. And remember, you can watch this or any of our previous Praxis conversations online. Just search for World Bank and Praxis, and follow us on Twitter with the hashtag #PacificPraxis. Until next time, I'm Bronwyn Adcock. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.